everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my recommendations for this time of year, so like spooky things, something that feels very like autumnal. And I've come up with a list of about 20, I think. I've also split them into some sort of categories, so if you want to skip to a certain section, I will leave those in the chapters bit. So this time of year for me is my favourite time for reading because I absolutely love reading like horror books, thrillers, mysteries, just anything a little bit darker, just while the evenings are getting darker and things just feel a little bit cozier. I just absolutely love this time of year. So my first category is anything that's kind of mystery, crime, thriller leaning, and the first one that I have to recommend is The Appeal by Janice Hallett. This book just sums up coziness for me. It's basically a mystery set in a small English village. We're following a amateur dramatic society. They put a play on every year, and they're putting one on in honour of this little girl to try and raise some money for her medical treatment, and then it ends in murder and somebody's in prison for it. So you're kind of reading as the perspective of a law student who is looking at all the different mixed media surrounding this case. So I think it's mainly like emails and texts, and you're trying to work out if the person that has been sent to prison is innocent or who really did it. For me, it's not the kind of thing that you can actually work out. There's quite a lot of twists and turns at the end that I didn't see coming, at least. I loved the feeling of being able to look through everyone's texts and figure out everyone's secrets, and I ended up giving it 5 stars because it was just so fast paced, I couldn't put it down, and yeah, it just really reminds me of this time of year. The next book is actually another mixed media book, and it's another 5-star read for me, and it's True Crime Story by Joseph Knox. We're following a group of people in their first year at university, and one of the girls goes missing. This one is told in interviews, so you're reading a bunch of interview transcripts with the people in her life, and you've also got this added perspective of the editor who's writing their own notes in it, but he's got a bit of a shady background and you're not sure if you can trust him. If you've heard me talk about this book before, then you know that it just completely took over my life for the time that I was reading it. This was the kind of book that you can kind of work it out if you pay close attention. I was taking so many notes on this book, trying to figure out who was lying, and I loved the university setting as well. It really just reminded me of being back at uni. Everything about this book just came together and was honestly like perfect for me. Next up on this list is Look Closer by David Ellis, and to be honest, I can't exactly remember the premise of this book, but it is set around Halloween. I'm pretty sure there is a murder on Halloween night, but then I also remember it being a very cleverly plotted mystery. There were lots of twists and turns that were really surprising, that kind of changed the whole perspective of the story in a sense. And I did enjoy this book, but for me it was a little bit too long, and also some of the motives and some of the tropes in this book are not my favourite in general. But that's more of a personal preference thing, and I've seen a lot of people really love this one. So if you like something that's going to sort of pull the rug out from under you, then I would definitely recommend this one. Next up I have Penance by Eliza Clark. So this one is a little bit of a literary true crime-esque book. So this book is set out as if it's a true crime story, and it's about a group of teenage girls who murder one of their supposed friends. We have a journalist who's basically crafting this true crime story. He's a little bit of an unreliable narrator as well. I'm pretty sure that this book is set during the summer, and it's also set in an English beach town. So if you are like a strictly seasonal reader, then just be aware of that. But for me, English beach towns are most of the time cloudy, grey, miserable. And I don't really mind reading about different seasons as long as the like genre fits. So for me, this true crime-esque story feels quite autumnal anyway. It looks at so many different topics, and it has quite a lot of commentary about true crime, and I just love Eliza Clark's writing. I will read anything that she writes. So if you don't want to save this for like the summertime, then this is definitely a good time to read this. And then lastly in this little category is Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanagh. So in this book we're following a woman who has sadly lost her daughter, and she believes that she knows who was responsible for it, and he's never faced justice. So she ends up meeting this woman who's in a kind of a similar situation to her, and they both just really want to kill the people that were behind this. So they agree to kill each other's person so that they won't be linked to it at all. It's based on that strangers on a train trope that I quite like. This one was just really fun. It was very gripping, very fast paced. I liked the writing. I don't remember if it's set during autumn, but I think it's set in New York, which again, for me, everything just kind of reminds me of autumn. So sorry if some of these books you're hearing and you're like, what the hell, that is so like summer or winter or whatever. But for me, like, thrillers equals this time of year. If you're in a bit of a thriller slump, as I know quite a lot of people are at the minute, then maybe give this one a go, because I did quite like this one. So now moving on to the next category, and this is just horror novels. To be honest, there's not a ton in this category because I was writing out my list and I realised that a lot of them are very summer vibes. So on there I had The Troop, which is like a boys camping trip, I think probably during the summer. I had The Ruins, which is set in the blistering heat. Yeah, just quite a few of them were very, very summer. I think this one might be set in summer as well, so I am sorry. But the first one I have here is Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. It's set near a beach, but it's not like a island beach. I'll show you the other cover on the screen now. For me, this is like cold beach. But anyway, this is one of my favourite horror books that I've read within the last couple of years. I'm going to have to resort to looking at the blurb to try and explain this one, because I remember it was a little bit complicated to explain. We're in a windswept cottage overlooking the sea. Wilder begins the last book that he will ever write. It's the story of his childhood companions and the shadowy figure of the Dagger Man who stalked the New England town where they spent their summers. Of a horror that has followed Wilder through the decades, and of Skye, Wilder's one-time friend who stole his unfinished memoir and turned it into a lurid best-selling novel. So this one doesn't feel super horror until a little bit later on. It kind of starts more as a coming-of-age story. But then some of the horror elements in this book are just my absolute favourite. It's got witchy elements in there. It's got a book within a book. I don't really want to spoil anything, but it's very, very clever. It all comes together perfectly, and yeah, I kind of felt like I wasn't super into it when I was reading it, and then I got to the end and I was like, wow, that was just masterfully done. Next up, I have more of a literary horror, I think. I don't think I've talked about this for a while, but it was one of my favourite books a couple of years ago. This is Leave the World Behind by Ruman Alam. So in this book, we're following a family who are staying at an Airbnb on the outskirts of New York, and whilst they're on this little vacation, the owners of the Airbnb turn up and basically say, there's something going on in the city, we don't really know what's going on, but we're a bit scared. Do you mind if we stay here, because at the end of the day it is our house? And it's just a very tense situation where we've got these two families. One of them is white, one of them is black. So there's discussions about race and class in here. There's this big unknown situation that's going on. Is it the end of the world? Is it an apocalypse? What is actually going on? And for me, that is the horror of this book. I think I gave this 4 stars at the time, but it's a book that I think about all the time. And I recently watched the film adaptation on Netflix, which I really enjoyed as well. It has just an unsettling, eerie feeling, and yeah, it just really has stayed with me over the years. One that is more straight up horror for me that I've read recently is Dead Girl Blues by David Sodergren. This is about a girl who is a dancer in a club, and one day she stumbles upon this scene that she can't really get over. She uncovers this like dark underbelly of the city. It's set in Edinburgh, in like a rainy Edinburgh. I was absolutely hooked straight away. It had like a campy, fun feel to it. I've since looked this up and people describe it as like a noir kind of situation, or like a pulp horror. I don't really know what any of those mean, but it definitely feels kind of silly and like it's taking the mick out of itself, but in a good way. I gave this 5 stars. It was perfectly dark, gruesome, and I will definitely be reading a lot more of David Sodergren's books because his writing just really worked for me, and I've already got like 3 on my TBR which I need to get to. And then lastly, for this little horror category, I've got Knock Knock Open Wide by Neil Sharpson. This is another one that I've read this year which I really enjoyed. It starts off with a really dark, disturbing scene where this girl finds a dead body. She decides that she's gonna take this body in her car and get some help. She ends up stumbling across a house that was probably not the best house that she could have found in this situation. And then we flip to a completely different timeline where we're following these 2 girls at university. They have an obsession with this creepy TV show where there's like a puppet involved and you never actually see the puppet. It's very mysterious. And then these timelines eventually kind of not come together, but they all make sense as one. I love the university setting again, which is kind of why it reminds me of this time of year. It's an Irish horror, so it's got like folklore in there. It's just very creepy, and I loved the way that it all came together in the end. I also love the little sapphic elements in there as well, so this is one of my favourite horrors that I've read this year. The next category for those of us that just need a short book is anything under 200 pages. I'm pretty sure nothing that I've mentioned so far is under 200 pages, although some of it might be. There will probably be crossovers in these categories, they're not like super strict. But the first one I have here I've not mentioned for quite a while, and it's Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. This book is about a mother who is grieving for her son. He, I think, died in a car accident, and she's visiting the place where he died one day. She accidentally cuts herself and drops a bit of blood onto the site where he died, and then that night she sees what she believes is her son stood like at the window, and it just gets progressively more and more gruesome as she's trying to sort of bring her son back. You might be able to speculate as to what's going to happen, but there is quite a lot of body horror in here. My copy's only 110 pages, and I just absolutely fell in love with these characters. It was the perfect amount of creepy and real life horror and just sad, and yeah, just perfect for this time of year. What would a horror novella recommendation video be without me banging on about We Need to Do Something by Max Booth III? And I love talking about this book because imagine having a name like Max Booth III. This book is about a family who already have quite a lot of tensions amongst them, and I think it's a tornado that goes on. So there's a tornado warning, and all this family cramp into the bathroom of the house. I can't exactly remember the reason why they're all in the bathroom. I'm guessing they thought it was like the safest place in the house. And during this tornado, a tree falls on the house and basically blocks them all in the bathroom so they can't get out. This is my like perfect horror novella. I really need to reread it. I keep trying to find a physical copy of it online, but I really want this specific cover and I can't find it anywhere. This was genuinely frightening. There were some scenes that literally made me have jump scare reactions. It had great body horror, it had great like fear of the unknown. The ending was perfect. I just loved everything about it, and yeah, I desperately need to reread this one, but like I say, I really want the physical copy. It was just everything I wanted, and I know that there's a film adaptation which I've heard is really, really bad. So if you've been put off by the film, please do try the book because I just loved it. Another one of my horror novella favourites is Come Closer by Sarah Gran. This is about a woman who kind of convinces herself that she's being possessed by some sort of presence. And it's just about this woman sort of spiralling into, is she possessed? Is she going crazy? The writing was just very addictive with this one. I read it all in one sitting. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of possession stories, this one just really worked for me. Next up we have a bit of a quieter horror story. I'm not even sure if I would class this as horror, but I'm pretty sure on Goodreads that's like the main category. This is The Country Will Bring Us No Peace by Matteo Simard. So this one is translated by Pablo Strauss, and it's about a couple who have fled to this idyllic little village to try and get away from something very traumatic that's happened to them. The horror in this book is kind of the spookiness of the village itself and just how unwelcoming the people there are, the growing distance between this couple. It's a very atmospheric and mysterious book which is centered around grief but set against like the backdrop of this creepy village and trying to figure out the mystery of that as well. This cover to me just screams autumn because even though it's very green, it's quite misty and moody, and yeah, I just feel like this is a good time to read this one. The next one is one of my most recent reads, and it's The Mustache by Emmanuel Carrere, I think. This one has been translated by Lanny Goodman, and it's about a guy who's been married for I think 10 years to his wife, and the whole 10 years he's had this big mustache on his face. One day as a joke he shaves the mustache off, and nobody in his life sort of notices that he's done that. Eventually he says to his wife, like, have you not noticed anything different about me? And she's like, what, you've never had a mustache? So it's honestly the like silliest and most basic concept ever, but this book just goes crazy. The whole time you don't know who you're supposed to believe. I loved being in our main character's head because the way that he tries to sort of rationalise what's going on makes complete sense to me. Even though some of it is a little bit like crazy, it's It's easy to be convinced by what's going on, and the mystery and the tension just builds and builds until the ending. And I really just had a good time with it. I think I gave it 4 stars. But if you like the idea of an unreliable narrator, of not knowing who you can trust, then I would definitely recommend this one. And then lastly in this category, I cannot not mention A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen Peck, which is my favourite book of the year so far. I have recently just kind of raved about this in my last video, but I will quickly go through it again. This is about a guy who is very religious in his life. He dies and wakes up in hell to his dismay. His version of hell is basically a ginormous library, and he has to find the book that tells the story of his life. He can then move on to heaven once he finds that book. It kind of reminds me of Piranesi, House of Leaves. I was just very interested in our main character, how over time the different groups of people come together, what societies are formed. It was just super interesting, and I just loved everything about it. It made me think a lot. And I need a physical copy of this book because I just feel like I could reread it endlessly. But it just reminds me of this time of year, I think, again, because of the book element, the library, the existential dread of it all. Yeah, I won't bore you too much on it because I know I just talked about it in my last video. So yeah, another just reminder to read that one as well. My last proper category for this video is short story collections, manga, that kind of thing. So first off, I want to recommend At Home with the Horrors by Sammy Scott. It's kind of hard to talk about what this book is about because obviously it's a collection of short stories. They're all different, but I just love the writing in this. It was very sort of straightforward, simple, easy to read. Sometimes I find that short stories can be quite cryptic and a little bit confusing and just leave you feeling a little bit lost, but these ones I found them just very straightforward. I think I enjoyed every single story in this collection. There was one 5-star, which I can't remember what it was called, but I will put the name on the screen. So yeah, if you're looking for just a good all-rounder, then I would recommend this one. Next up is Night Shift by Stephen King. So I've read a handful of Stephen King books, and his short stories are my favourite by far. I find him way too rambly in his actual novels, but I absolutely love the ideas behind his stories. So for me, short stories are the perfect way to read Stephen King. With At Home with the Horrors, I can't remember a ton of like individual stories, but with Night Shift, there are some visuals just ingrained in my head. There were quite a few that I didn't like, so a few that I gave like a 2-star. But I did have a lot of like 4s, 5s. Quite a varied collection as well, I thought. Lots of different ideas, lots of different like writing styles. Yeah, it was just very, very fun. Also, a little side note, I would probably recommend 1922 by Stephen King. I think that's in a collection, but I can't remember which one. I've just read it as like a standalone novella. I won't say too much about that one, but it's basically about a guy and his son as they're trying to move past a really bad thing that they've done and he's just telling the story of it. So if you're interested in reading some Stephen King books, then I would definitely recommend the short story avenue. Next up is a collection that I've recently just finished. The long title for this book is Found, an anthology of found footage horror stories, and it's been edited together by Andrew Cole and another guy. Can't remember his name. I'll put it on the screen. This is a bunch of different authors who've all contributed to this collection, so that's quite fun to see everyone's different styles. There were quite a few in this book that I wondered, like, how is this found footage? And I don't know if it was just me being thick, but some of them, yeah, I just didn't really get the link. It's a little bit like At Home with the Horrors. I enjoyed reading it while I had it. There's not a ton that are super memorable to me. I wish it would have freaked me out a little bit more, but it was overall a good collection. I think I gave it like a 3 or a 4-star overall. And then lastly, I just want to give a shout out to Junji Ito because he is the only, I think, manga author that I've ever read from, and he just hits it every time. This is Shiver, which my sister and her boyfriend kindly gave me for my birthday, I think last year. The visuals in these mangas are just absolutely horrific. Like, it's literally to the point where I get scared to turn the page because I know that there's going to be some horrific image there. Definitely very terrifying. You can get a glimpse just from the cover what is going on in this book. We've got this creepy, I think that was a model. Yeah, this was a model and everyone was kind of like, how the hell is this person a model? There's also a story about holes, so if you've got that phobia where you don't like crumpets, then that one is not going to be fun for you. And there was a really horrific one about oil. They just eat oil all the time. The house is oily and they're oily. Their skin is oily. Oh, literally, I feel sick. I think I just like something just happened in my throat that I didn't like. So let's move on. My other book that I've read from Junji Ito is Uzumaki. I think I got this from the library, so I don't actually own it. But this one is my favourite so far that I've read. It is basically a collection of kind of little individual stories set in the same universe where spirals have kind of taken over. Again, lots of horrifying visuals, people with like snail backs. Trust me, it's horrific and scary and terrifying. If you want more of a visual horror, then manga is probably the way to go, because there's not a ton of text in here. A lot of it is just gross images, and yeah, very, very fun and quick to get through. And then I thought I would just give a couple of non-fiction recommendations for people that are into that. The first one is The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, I think is her name. And this one is about the 5 women that Jack the Ripper murdered. Rather than looking at Jack the Ripper himself, it looks more about obviously the women and tells all of their stories, but it also looks at the time period and how people back in those days would have lived, the jobs that they were doing, the money that they would earn, what they would eat, all that kind of thing. So it's kind of like a history, true crime mishmash. And I recently listened to this and it was just fascinating. It was very atmospheric. It really puts you back in that, like, what I picture to be quite a gothic Victorian era. There's such like a specific image with this book where you're in like the misty cobbled streets and it's freezing cold. If you're into true crime and you're into that conversation of like moving away from glorifying the perpetrators and focusing on the victims, then this book is perfect for you, because it really deep delves into these women's lives, and the fact that their lives were cut short so abruptly and so violently every time was just very shocking to read, and just so sad. A lot of these women had families, had children, a lot had issues with alcoholism that was really upsetting to read about, and also just left me wondering like why on earth we still drink alcohol, because if we knew back then that it was such an awful thing, then why do we still drink it now? But that's a whole different topic of conversation. So maybe if you're looking to branch out into non-fiction and you've typically read like crime stories, then this would be a good place to start. And then my last one is a little shout out to Written in Bone by Sue Black. This is a book written by a forensic anthropologist where she looks at the human skeleton and basically just tells you tons of different facts and stories about the bones, how she identifies them, some of the typical injuries that are caused to them and how she can work it out. And then she also talks a lot about some real life cases where she's assisted the police like across the world to identify people, figure out what happened to them. So again, another sort of crime-ish related non-fiction that is super interesting. Again, if you're looking to sort of get into non-fiction, then that might be a good place to start. There's a couple others that I haven't read yet, but I have on my TBR. There's one about crematoriums, which might be quite fun for this time of year, which sounds a bit gross because people die all the time. But yeah, I'm hoping to read some more non-fiction in the near future, so I'll hopefully have some more recommendations if you're into that. But yeah, that is everything for this video, I think. Thank you for watching till the end if you're still here, and I hope that you've managed to find at least one book recommendation that you want to read. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by giving it a like or leaving a comment, and subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!